if you're passionate about something, you're going to do better than no matter what career choice that is. You're going to probably perform well and do well overall.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Homework Help Show Student Influencers podcast. Today, I'm here with Aurthi. So welcome. How are you today?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Just to get started, why don't you go ahead and tell us where you were born and raised, and then where you are now?
So I was actually born in India, and then my family moved to Canada when I was 4 years old. I have moved around quite a lot within Ontario itself, but I'm currently located in Toronto.
Perfect. Where in India were you born?
Chennai, India, South India.
Okay, I've never heard of that before.
Yeah.
In the south of India, you said?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And what school or college, university do you currently go to?
So I just finished up the physician assistant professional degree program at the University of Toronto in Canada. Prior to that, I finished my undergrad studies at Western University in London, Ontario, and that was in kinesiology and medical sciences.
Okay, perfect. And what are you doing right now? So you said you just finished the PA program?
Yeah, so currently I'm working some temporary jobs while applying for a full-time position as a physician assistant. So in Ontario, we have this Career Start program to help new grads secure jobs. So the government covers half the salary while the employer covers the other half for like a 1 to 2 year period. And the grant and the corresponding job postings are yet to be released. So once that happens, I'm sure things will kickstart and hopefully I'll be employed by the end of this year.
Perfect. That's really cool. I didn't know that they had a program for that.
Yeah.
I know they have programs for like other industries too. So I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, this is something specifically for the PA profession in Ontario. So considering it's a growing profession, it definitely helps the new grads.
Cool. So for those listening who might not be completely sure, PA stands for physician assistant, correct?
Correct.
And can you tell me a bit about what that position entails?
Yeah, so physician assistants, or PA for short, as you mentioned, are advanced practice practitioners or advanced practitioners like APP or AP, and they're trained using the medical model similar to physicians. So correspondingly, our scope of practice also mirrors that of the supervising physician, who we work with in a collaborative manner to consult, diagnose, and treat patients. So we're also able to perform like controlled acts, such as administering injections or casting a fracture, which are usually delegated to us by our supervising physician, usually in the form of medical directives.
Okay.
PAs are generally trained as like generalists and assist in various clinical settings, including family medicine, ER, other specialties, including in the OR for surgical specialties as well. But yeah, like the flexibility of our role allows us to help out in any setting. And we're particularly known for like reducing wait times in the ER or increasing access to care in like rural underserved areas.
Okay, so you would work kind of either in a hospital or in a doctor's office or really wherever you need to be, right?
Exactly. Wherever you can find a physician, you can find a PA pretty much just to help them out and work like in a team-based setting.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. What made you kind of decide to take that path and become a physician assistant? Were you kind of always interested in that? I know you said you did study kinesiology before that.
So that's a common question that I get. So in high school, I was really interested in the sciences, which I know a lot of students are. So I was trying to figure out what to do in terms of undergrad, but also ultimately as a career. And I think the most obvious or the most popular option back then was, following life sciences or taking health sciences undergrad and then pursuing medical school. But even back then, like I was hesitant to like pursue medical school because it's super long in terms of schooling, but also a lot of debt. And also the work-life balance in terms of career was something that I wanted or I prioritized. So I was hesitant about that career path. And then with regards to like why I ended up in kin for my undergrad, in grade 12, I took the exercise science course that basically helped me decide my undergrad studies because I really enjoyed anatomy, like biomechanics, because I really like physics, and biomechanics is physics applied to the human body. So that was interesting for me. So once I went into undergrad, I still continued to take science courses, mostly to keep my options open, but also just to explore other career options and see what interests me. I did take the MCAT twice, again, to keep my options open. It was definitely not a pleasant experience, but
right.
Again, like I think as an undergrad student, I wanted to take all these prerequisite courses or all these exams just to keep my option open to apply to med school should the time come, or when the time came. And then in fourth year, this is going to sound super silly. Every time I say it, I get the most like shocked reaction, but I honestly, in fourth year, I was like super like bummed out, because I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, it's been 4 years. I still don't know what I want as my end goal. And then I basically did a Google search, and I think it was something along the lines of like medical careers with shorter schooling and less expensive than becoming a physician, but something longer than that. And I came across the physician assistant program at University of Manitoba. And I still remember being surprised that such a profession existed. And then the more I researched about it, I came across the profession was super established in the States, and there were like a lot of programs in the States. So pretty much after that epiphany, I basically like finished undergrad, and then that was my ultimate goal of becoming a PA. So I just took the next steps accordingly.
Well, I feel like that's something a lot of people kind of do to discover stuff, is just do a Google search about it.
Yeah,
Because
like
there's so much information out there. Why not just, throw out a search and see what happens?
Exactly. Yeah, no, Google was definitely my friend in fourth year undergrad. I was like, I need some motivation to get through. And I think Google definitely helped me out there.
Yeah, definitely sounds like it.
Mm-hmm.
So what path, I know we kind of just talked about a little bit how you got to PA school, but what kind of path did you take specifically to get into PA school, in terms of like admissions, and like, how did that work?
Yeah, definitely. So after high school, I did my 4 years of undergrad in kinesiology and medical sciences. And then I actually took a year off to work as a kinesiologist, because for PA school, in order to be a competitive applicant, they ask for like a lot of patient care hours or healthcare experience hours. So that's like something unique to PA school that I would say compared to medical school, in that there's a lot of emphasis on those healthcare experience hours depending on the program. So I applied to both PA schools in the States as well as Canada. And like some of these programs actually, I think they required 10,000 hours in order for you to be competitive.
Wow.
So it was a crazy number. And considering I was able to like combine all my hours that I got throughout high school, or part of high school and undergrad, I still wasn't anywhere close to that, because I was being a full-time student.
Right.
So my year off working as a kinesiologist full-time definitely helped with my application. And then I basically started my application process, so during my year off. And again, as I mentioned, I applied to the States, which is rolling admissions. So because I started that application early, I interviewed for it early as well. So I got an interview for a school in New York. And then after that, I started my Canadian application. I guess it might be helpful to go over the general overview of the application, if that's something.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so the general overview for application for PA school would be the primary application. So in the States, they use this portal called CASPA. So that's the Centralized Application Service for PAs. And then in Canada, they use OUAC, so OUAC. Again, I think it's the Ontario University Application Center or something.
Yeah.
And then
I remember going through that too.
Yeah. So those two different portals, basically you do your primary application where you put in your personal details, your grades, description of your healthcare experience. This is usually very brief. And then the secondary application, or more commonly known as the supplemental application, is where you answer essay questions specific to the school and program. And it's usually in like paragraph format or essays. And then CASPA, I think, also has like a personal statement that you write. So that would be for all the programs you apply for the States. And the University of Manitoba, specifically in Canada, has a similar personal essay. Those ones always are super tough, because you have to you have all these ideas you want to write, and you can only condense it in like one page or something and say why you want to be a PA.
Right.
But regardless, yeah, so after that, you get invited to interview, which could be MMI or panel style interview. And then after you hear back about admissions, and it's honestly like a long process. I remember going through it being super nervous because like the waiting game is like, it's crazy. Like you can't do much, but you just have to wait, and you just like wait for that email, always refreshing your email. But yeah, it's a long process, but if you put in the work, you start early, and you put in some quality work, it'll definitely be worth it.
How long would you say that process took?
Oh, months, definitely months. So I started early because I wanted to take my time. And considering I was working full time, I didn't have I couldn't sit down a whole day and work on my application. So I put in like a few hours sometimes, if I'm lucky, every day. And then sometimes I'd take a few days off and then go back to the application. But I think like you can start even before the application opens by starting to think about the healthcare experience hours and like the skills you learned from those experiences that you can use in your application. So it's never too.
Yeah, or even if maybe you wanted to start practicing like your essays and personal statements and like
exactly
spend more time on those.
Exactly. Yeah. I think those are all great things that you can get started on earlier. You don't have to wait for the application to open.
And definitely, like, what time of year is that? Would you apply like in the spring?
So for the States, because it's rolling admission, I did apply like in the spring, and then I got interviewed in the winter. But for Canada, you actually apply in the winter, like fall, winter time, and then you get interviewed the following spring. And then like in a few months or like in a couple of months, you would start the program.
Okay. So it's definitely like you would do it pretty soon into the semester before, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Just so that anybody listening who is considering taking this same career path might want to know that, so they can start getting prepared ahead of time.
I agree. Yeah. And I think like that's one of my tips to applicants, like start early, like researching about the career options, but also programs, so that you can kind of start preparing accordingly. I know it's always like, I think even now there's admission requirements going up about the PA programs. And even though applications are due in February, we have like pre-PAs who are already working on their application now and, you know, getting their healthcare experience hours. So when you have more time, you feel less rushed and you'll put in more quality work.
Exactly. And you just have that extra time to take your time and not stress yourself out to the point where you're just like throwing things together in a panic. Because I know a lot of students end up doing that. And that reflects in when you're applying to colleges and universities or post-secondary or post-grad programs.
Exactly. No, I totally agree with that. Yeah.
Definitely. Do you have any other kind of tips or advice for students looking to get into either a PA program or even just another kind of similar clinical program like this one?
Yeah, definitely. So as I mentioned earlier, like starting you to research early about career options, like you can even start as early as middle school. I think I got a message from a student who was like in grade 5 or grade 6 who was like looking through Instagram and finding career options just to motivate them. And they're like, oh, what's a PA? So I think it's inspiring to see that. And it's definitely helpful because then they'll have this like career that they're working towards. And again, when you start early, it's just like a easier or relatively easier process because you're a bit more prepared. So social media definitely is like a good resource in that sense as well, because I know a lot of PAs, but also other professions, like other medical students or other physicians or DOs who share their journey as well. So it's helpful to see that personal aspect of the journey.
Yeah, definitely.
And then if you're unsure of what you want to do, I think observerships or volunteering in clinical placements are helpful as well. Because that kind of gives you that real life experience to see if that's something you see yourself doing down the line. I think we already talked about researching about the specific programs. And also I think with students, they take these prerequisite courses, which I know like is a requirement, but I would also encourage students to take courses that they enjoy or they find interesting, because I think that helps you figure out who you are as a person and what you're interested in to help determine a career option. And sometimes if one of these prerequisite courses align with that, then that's like, you know, a bonus. And I don't know, have you heard of bird courses?
Yep, definitely.
Yeah. So bird courses are a very common thing in undergrad. I
Yeah.
know all these students are like, let me take a bird course to boost my GPA. And there's nothing wrong with it. But if you could find a bird course that you're genuinely interested in or will help you interact with patients or something, some aspect of your career down the line, then I think that's also helpful. I think, so I took an English course, like children's literature or something. And like, I took it because I needed an English course, but I was actually curious to see like all these books and like what they're the analysis and like the deeper meaning or whatever is. And it actually gives you a good, it teaches you all these critical thinking skills so that you look beyond like the superficial aspect of any writing. So I found that helpful, and I still find that helpful as like a clinician now. So that would be a good example of that.
I think that definitely, that's the thing, like with bird courses, like, yeah, okay, you can take the easy course to improve your GPA. And again, like you said, there's nothing wrong with that, but there's a lot of bird courses out there that will still help you improve your GPA, but also teach you important other skills that may not be related to your program that you're studying specifically, but it could be anything related to like life skills, or even like you said, just learning to think critically about things, because you could learn that in so many different disciplines and so many different types of courses too.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think another course I remember now is, I think there was like a resume or professional writing course that's super helpful no matter what field you go into, because to apply to any job, you need a resume and cover letters. So that's going to come in clutch for any profession.
Yeah.
So
I think that should be a mandatory course for everybody, because I feel like if everyone took a course like that, people would be so ahead of the game, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I definitely took quite a few bird courses. I actually think I did a children's literature course too.
No way. That's
Now that I think about it, I'm like, I did that too, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. And it's funny so I had to do an essay on Coraline. Okay. And I'm like, I remember being like, okay, this is like very like dark or something. And then I just recently watched the movie, and I'm like, you would never catch any of that if you were just watching the movie, as creepy as the movie is. But like, it's just super interesting to start thinking that way. And it definitely shapes who you are, or like how you think in any capacity.
Yeah, just how you look at things, and how your own experiences and your own background kind of shape the way that you interpret that information and what you're seeing. And even to going, like, when you're, especially with a course like that, like a children's literature course, and you're going back and you're looking at, things that maybe you watched this Disney movie as a child, and now you're looking back at it with like that critical lens, and you have this entirely new perspective on it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely a lot of mind-blowing moments during that course.
Yeah, definitely. I had the same experience. So going back to going into PA school, what was it kind of like? I was trying to choose my words. What was it kind of like to transition from that undergrad program into a more specialized PA school? Were there any kind of challenges that you faced when you were going from one environment to the other?
Yeah, definitely. That's a great question. So studying in PA school is definitely different from undergrad. I think they say like studying PA school or learning in PA school is like drinking water out of a fire hydrant. So, and honestly, that analogy, like I couldn't agree more, because a lot of information is thrown at you in didactic year, which is the first year of PA school. And I found it challenging to cover all the material and like prepare for exams, but also like making sure that I retain that information for clinical practice. So I think you should go into PA school like with a clinician's mindset. I don't know if that makes sense, where instead of focusing on like what's to be like, what's going to be tested on my exam and what do I need to know, like you would in undergrad, you would need to focus on like understanding the material and kind of how it applies to like a clinical example or a patient case. So
like a more practical.
Exactly. That's the word. Yeah. So a clinician mindset, like a more practical learning. And I think they differentiate like passive learning and active learning. And in undergrad, we do a lot of passive learning where we're like, it's just rote memorization. We know the information, we can recognize it on a multiple choice option. But then with PA school, you're going to be given a clinical vignette, which is like a patient case scenario. And you're going to have to apply what you learned to make a decision for like a patient case scenario. So you need to understand the material. But when there's like a lot of information presented to you at once, it can be like super overwhelming.
Right. That makes sense.
So I think ultimately what I had to do was basically try to figure out the type of learner I was. So I know like I'm a visual learner. I don't know if you're also a visual learner or auditory learner. Visual as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so actually a lot of my classmates were auditory learners. So they enjoyed the lecture videos and they would just listen to it on repeat, and that would help consolidate the information. But for me, like I like seeing videos or like drawing out concepts. And I think from undergrad to PA school, that was like a major transition or major reflection point where I had to be like, okay, I'm a visual learner. So I have to find resources to help me like better learn or learn more efficiently because I have all this information to cover. So that's one thing. And then also like quizzing each other or teaching concepts to your classmates, things you don't do often in undergrad, but you would do so in professional degree programs.
Right.
Other challenges is maintaining a school life balance. So depending on the program, this would vary, but in PA school particularly, I found myself like, no, I have too much studying to do. I can't, hang out, or I can't do this. But I eventually like work towards finding that balance.
Yeah, it's definitely finding that balance is really tricky, especially like when, like, I know a lot of students struggle with that in their first year of any program because it's such a different environment and you're just going into this world where you're accountable for everything, and like it's important to have fun while you're in school, but it's also important to make sure you get your work done because that's what you're paying to be there for.
Exactly. And I think like even in undergrad, like going from high school to undergrad, that's a major stressor for students because one, you're paying for your education, but two, like this is like you have to figure out what you're going to do with this degree that you're paying for and like what's your ultimate career. So there's that added pressure. Whereas high school, like it's funded, so you're just like, there to learn and do well. But it definitely adds more responsibilities. And then PA program on top of that with a lot of information. And then this, I guess, is added pressure in that you have to learn well enough to practice and take care of patients after school or after school as in after PA school, 2 years of PA school. It's definitely like, I think you keep adding pressure as you go throughout your education or academic career. And that's definitely something that students will probably be feeling stressed about, but again, we're all in the same boat in that sense.
Yeah. While we're on that topic, when you were in school, did you also work part-time or anything like that?
So in undergrad, I worked as a tennis coach, and I actually enjoyed it because it gave me the opportunity to kind of, stop studying and play the sport I love or teach the sport I love. I also did get to play the sport I love. I played 4 years varsity tennis for Western. Okay. So again, really enjoyed doing that. And I think I had a better school life balance in that sense in undergrad. PA school, I did not work at all. I was like in my room studying most of the time. I did schedule, like, I hung out with friends or family. I spent time with family. I tried to squeeze workouts in, and that was basically my break. I did have classmates though who did work part-time, and they enjoyed it because same thing as like tennis coaching for me in undergrad, they liked that it was this opportunity where they definitely had to stop studying. Like it was something like drawing them away, not something that it was optional. And they also got to make some, money concurrently. So that was also a great thing. So I think depending on the type of student you are, it's definitely possible, but that's something that will vary based on the individual.
Yeah, like it definitely will depend on how heavy workload your program is. I mean, that's kind of helpful too, that you were able to do tennis coaching too, because then you're getting that exercise in too, which is super helpful for everything, like for your self-care and all of that kind of stuff too. So that's a really good way to kind of blend all of those together.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So I actually haven't worked like the typical like retail job or anything. Like I've always worked. So prior to working as a kinesiologist, I've only coached tennis.
Oh,
So
really?
yeah, so it's actually kind of unique. My parents have always been like, oh no, like, don't get distracted by working. But I'm like, but if it's tennis coaching, I'm like, being active. And they're
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, yeah, like, I guess that's fair. So I've only done coaching. And then when I started working as a kin, it was still like active, like, you're teaching exercises, you're sometimes doing it with the patient so that their form is correct.
Mm-hmm.
So that was always like nice. And then now as a PA, like practicing medicine, this is my ultimate goal. So I
Right.
don't mind that it's not as active, but again, depending on the specialty, like if I work in orthopedics or sports medicine, then there's definitely like an active or more active component to it.
Yeah, you could definitely incorporate the tennis in there if you were working in
Mm-hmm.
sports medicine for sure.
Exactly.
And you'd
Yeah.
obviously have a lot of experience to help you out with that too.
Yeah.
Um, so with all of that, even whether you were working or not, did you have any kind of things you did to manage your time, or any like time management routines that helped you kind of stay on track and still make time for your family and friends?
Yeah. So I don't know about you, but I'm a big fan of to-do lists.
Yeah,
So
me
I
too.
I love planning ahead and like making this list of things that I have to do, even if it's like the simplest thing. Like sometimes I put in like make coffee or make breakfast, and just to check that off
Yeah,
is super like motivating.
I do the same thing.
Yeah, I think a lot of us could probably, like a lot of us listening could probably agree with us on that, but it's just super, like, it's a great incentive just to check it off the to-do list. So
Yeah.
sometimes we add these silly ones on, but jokes aside, like I basically started doing this to-do list, and every Sunday when I was in school, I would write down the deadlines and like any synchronized online classes or any like exams, anything like that. And then I would schedule my studying around that. But I also made sure I scheduled like, oh, like hang out with my friend on this day and like work out at this time, so that I like equally balance that alongside my studying. So to-do lists are definitely helpful, and then planning ahead. So looking ahead like for the whole month and then like weekly, I found that helpful. I think the other thing is, you're going to think I'm crazy, but I am I'm an early morning person. So I like waking up at like 5 a.m. like myself, like not because I have to, but because I'm super productive during that time. So I wake up at 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. and get most of my work done in the first like 5-6 hours, and then I'll take my break. And usually I hit like a slump after that. But I have friends who are like night owls, so they like sleep throughout the day, wake up at like 4:30 p.m. and then their day is just getting started, and they sleep at like 3 a.m. or something. So I think as a student, figure out like what type of or what type of person you are, like early morning person or like a night owl, and like study accordingly. And then lastly, I would say like being self-aware. So all of us are going to probably, like not be productive all the time, and just reflecting on that, and kind of taking a break or doing whatever it takes to get you back on track. I think that's important, because I found myself sometimes I'm like, okay, no, I can't afford to take a break now. I need to be productive. But then I was like super tired that I couldn't be productive. So it's like a vicious cycle. But if you're like self-reflecting and self-aware, then you definitely would be like, enhancing your productivity in the long run.
I think that the point about being self-aware is really important, because it goes back to a lot of what we've just talked about, like knowing your learning style and what works for you, knowing what kind of person you are, whether you're a morning person or a night person or anything like that, and knowing, okay, this is when I feel most productive. So maybe I should put all of my most important tasks in this window. And if that means waking up at 5 a.m. and doing it when like doing things in the morning, then do that. But if you're not a morning person and that means scheduling all your stuff in the evening, then that works too. But I think that self-awareness is really, really key to all of those different factors of student life in general.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. And I think the other thing is like variety. So a lot of people like, set like maybe 2 tasks in a day, and like, they're like, okay, I'm going to like finish this whole essay in one sitting, or finish like the rough draft even. Like, I think if you set 2 hours to do quality work for one assignment, and then move on to another task and start thinking about something else, and then even come back to the same assignment that you worked on before or something else, and then, the next day kind of put in that quality work in a short amount of time. I find like that end product is usually better, instead of cramming it all in one sitting.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, because there's nothing the most demotivating thing I think to me is having this really big, say it's an essay, say whatever it is, and you're just, I'm going to spend this whole day working on this. And like, I know from my own experience, every time I do that, I don't end up working on that thing the whole day because I worked on it for maybe a couple hours and then I just go, okay, I'm done with this. Like it's so hard to motivate yourself to just do one thing the whole time and for a long period of time.
Yeah, I find like students are like myself for sure, but a lot of students get distracted and like we have like access to social media and things like that. But also if you're doing the same thing at once, unless there's like some sort of like time pressure or like, you know, the deadline's tonight, I have to get this done. Usually you're not going to be able to like put in quality work in that whole like 8-hour span. So just like, I guess, thinking ahead and just saying, okay, 2 hours of this essay and then I move on. And I think the brain, like the human brain probably really likes the variety. So it's like, okay, we're like changing gears. We're going to, you know, look at this now and then go like that.
I read a statistic a long time ago, and I can't even remember where I read it, but it was that the human brain can really only focus on one thing for 90 minutes.
Yeah.
And then after 90 minutes, it's just like that focus isn't there anymore. And that's kind of what, like certain like the Pomodoro Technique, that's what kind of all of those things are based on. And you have to keep, like, you can't just try to shove. That's why, like, we always say in all of our content, we always say, like, don't pull those all-nighters because you can't force your brain to focus productively on something for hours and hours without a break.
Yeah, no, I haven't pulled an all-nighter ever in school.
I don't think I ever pulled any either.
Yeah. Like I personally find that I'd rather get like a few hours of sleep and perform better on the exam the next day than like, you know, cram all this information in and not be able to function when I'm writing the exam. So I'm always like minimum 3 to 6 hours of sleep if like, you know, it's last minute, but I always try to get minimum 6 hours. And I think the other thing you mentioned, the Pomodoro like timer, I only started using that in PA school because we had like 30 lectures to cover in 1 week for one course, in which case I'm like, yeah, I have to study, but I have to study efficiently. So let's do 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off. And then I think you do that like a few cycles and then you get a 10-minute break or a 30-minute break.
Yeah.
And then I'd like usually like eat lunch with like a show so that I'm taking my mind off, resting my brain, and then jump back into it. But any like timers like that or any tools out there that help you kind of, you know, stay on task for that allocated time period is super helpful as a student.
Yeah, we talk about the Pomodoro Technique a lot because not a lot of people, from my experience anyway, not a lot of people have really heard of it. But like once people start using it, they're like, okay, this makes a really big difference. Because like using those timers does make a difference. So
yeah, especially when you have like a lot to do. It almost helps you like break it down in like a reasonable manner and then also be productive. So it's like a win-win. You don't have to do the job. The timer's telling you when to do it. So
yeah. And for me too, something about just like knowing that timer's there, it's like really gives me that push to focus. I'm like, okay, the timer's going to go off. The timer's going to go off. I have to finish this. And then sometimes it's even done before the timer goes off.
Yeah. And I think the trick is to not look at the timer.
Yeah.
You have to hide it in the background.
You have to just know. Yeah.
Because if you're like, wow, I worked so hard, and you set the timer at like 25 minutes, you work so hard, and you're like, how many minutes has it been? It's been 2 minutes.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I can't do 23 more minutes of this. So.
But if you can't see the time and you just keep going and going, you're always going to be like, okay, it's going to go off any minute. So you're really like hunker down, and it really motivates you to just get that finished.
Yeah, no, I agree. I totally agree with that one.
Definitely. So another thing that I like to kind of ask people, because I know, especially right now, just given the state of life right now, is I like to talk about managing stress. So is there anything that you kind of do to manage stress with all of these, like, you know, all this demanding, I mean, I guess right now, more so like while you were in PA school or even now while you're applying to jobs and stuff like that?
Yeah. So I think, so I'm a strong believer in maintaining school life, work-life balance. So I always try to do that, even no matter how overwhelmed I feel with the work I have to do. So I think, again, being self-reflective and knowing when, you know, like you're stressed and taking actions accordingly. So I know students will probably feel super guilty if they take a few hours off from studying, or even an entire day or entire weekend off just to relax and do no schoolwork. I know I did when I started PA school, but I think just to kind of reassure yourself that that's okay, and prioritizing your mental health and just like, trying to normalize your stress levels, I think that's key. The other thing is like doing things you love. So I know like studying is always going to be there. If you're in a program, like studying is always going to be there. There's always going to be work to do. But like for me, I played tennis. I made sure that I got the opportunity to play tennis. So that was more so in undergrad, but even in PA school, I actually missed the sport so much that I would like come home to my parents because there was a tennis court closer to home. And then I would like schedule like a hit with my friends just so that I got that I guess stress relief. And that sometimes it's actually therapeutic to play tennis and like, hit
the ball
balls
really hard.
Exactly. Like, pull a Serena Williams. So
yeah.
So that's something I did. I know classmates who enjoyed cooking and started cooking to help them, like it's like, okay, I'm going to cook this meal, so I'll just have to get the studying done and then meal prep. So I started doing that as well. Especially during the pandemic when we had to be at home. I'm like, you know what, like good food is always a good incentive to get studying done. And It's also like stress relief. So I started trying out new recipes, and when the food turned out great, it was a bonus. So that's always nice. But I think, like being self-reflective again, whether you're overwhelmed, whether you're stressed, and doing things you love, and prioritizing that like balance between school or even work and life, because you want to avoid burnout in the long run. Because once you're burned out, like you have no choice. You do have to take that time off. So pacing yourself.
That student burnout is a really, really big thing because so many students go through that, and like it takes a lot of focus to kind of pull yourself out of that, and avoiding it by doing all of like the de-stressing and stuff like that is a lot easier on you as a person than letting yourself hit that point where when you get that burnout and not knowing if you'll kind of come back from that.
Exactly. No, that's a definitely like, it's an important point for students because, and I think like pacing yourself, just like you would start a marathon. Like I know a lot of my classmates, like they went like 110% in September itself. And we would get like hundreds of pages of reading sometimes. And you would have to complete this in like a couple of nights, or like sometimes even one night would get like assigned 70 pages. And these are like dense textbooks. So kind of realizing that that's a lot of work, and how am I going to study efficiently? So focusing on the key points, and yes, you're like, it's a lot of work, but how am I going to make it less stressful? So when I started PA school, like I didn't dive in where I'm like, okay, I'm giving my 110%. Like I paced myself so that my performance stayed steady and I like didn't burn out. So I made sure that I like realized, and then I didn't, I don't know, it sounds like don't give it your all. Like you should give it your all, but also give enough that you have enough for yourself so that you're not burning out.
Yeah.
And that being said, like also like speaking to your parents or your friends or your siblings, like, hey, I'm stressed. Like I've been studying like 8 hours nonstop and I just need to whine about it, or like, vent about it.
Yeah.
That's always like super therapeutic too. So just talking about something else while in the middle of like doing something stressful.
Yeah, definitely talking it out. It's just, it gets that everything off your chest. It really feels a lot better if you do that.
Yeah, my mom had to hear a lot of it during my PA school. I'd be like, yeah, we have like 350 pages of notes to study for this pathology exam coming up in 2 days. She's like, how far are you? I'm like, page 50. She's like, okay, let's talk about something else then.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think like talking about it, and then like realistically, like you're going to cover the information, or like the test is going to come and you're going to hopefully do well, but like stressing about it is just like adding to more stress. Like you have the stress of the exam itself, why add more to it? So
and often overwhelming yourself with stress is less productive too, because then you're so fixated on how stressed you are that you don't actually end up doing the work or the studying.
Yeah, and it's like a vicious cycle after that. So
yeah,
just I think in kin we learned something. This is going to sound super nerdy. I think it's like called the Yerkes-Dodson's law or something. So it's specifically for like sports performance, but it's basically this graph that says like you need some level of stress or anxiety to perform well, because it shows that you care, and it shows that like, this is something you want to do well in.
Mm-hmm.
But it has to be like the optimal level of anxiety so that you're performing well, but it's not hindering your performance. So I've like, every time you're stressed as students, like it's good, like you care, you want to do well, but use that to your advantage to like make your, like, you know, perform better, instead of it, again, as you were saying, like negatively affecting your performance, where you're stressing about it, and then it's just a vicious cycle after that.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense to me, because it's all about how you manage that stress. Like, it should be there if you care about something, but it doesn't have to get to the point where you're like feeling overwhelmed by it, or it's impacting the way you do something.
Exactly.
Definitely. What would you say is one or the kind of key to your success in school, whether it was in your undergrad or just everything in general?
One would be hard, if I could list a few. Is that okay?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so I think I would say it's different for undergrad and PA school, just because of like the type of program and where I was at that stage of my life. So undergrad, I would say, coming out of high school, going into undergrad, just staying disciplined. I know, like, in first year of undergrad, you have like a lot of distractions, like all these different clubs you can join. Being on res is like a, you know, fun experience, but it's also super distracting when you're trying to study. So being disciplined, that's something that I found helpful in undergrad. And then having motivating friends. So like, you have, like, I think whoever you surround yourself with is how you're going to be motivated as well. And all the people I surrounded myself with ended up going to med school. So they were super driven, and they were super, like, you know, prioritizing school, but also like going out once in a while. So I think maintaining that balance. So I would definitely say my social circle. And lastly, my extracurriculars. So in undergrad, playing tennis, like, yes, it was good to maintain that school life balance, but I learned a lot of like transferable skills from tennis, and varsity tennis specifically, that I applied to academics as well. So like the work ethic, when, like, you know, things are hard, like, you just work on what you need to work on. So if one day my like backhand's not working, then I would just focus on that, but I know my other strokes are good. So if in biology I'm not understanding a specific topic or specific concept, then I would focus on that instead of something I'm already comfortable with. So that'd be like a good example. And then just like time management and confidence and leadership skills that I took from tennis that I applied to academics and extracurriculars, like other, like Habitat for Humanity was like another club that I joined. And just like the confidence you get from playing a sport or any other extracurriculars, you can apply that in an academic setting. So that's something. And then as a PA student, I think things shifted. So I didn't have tennis as much. Like, I still had the history, but I think it was more my work ethic. So despite how much, like, all the dense material, like all the coursework and all the other assignments and everything that we had to cover in a short period of time, I think my work ethic was like, you know, just keep up with the material and just always kind of keep at it, and not kind of getting deterred by all the overwhelming work and all the stress. I think that was helpful. My passion for both medicine, but also the profession. So in Canada, so PA is actually a growing profession in Canada. Okay. So I think, like, if you're joining the program here, you're automatically an advocate to advocate for the profession. So I found that to be helpful. And that's part of the reason why I started sharing my journey on Instagram, because it advocates for the profession. It advocates for like the journey through PA school. So other pre-PAs get inspired or even get to know more about it. So I found that to be that passion to help motivate me.
Yeah, definitely.
So to be successful. And then I guess just like PA mentors. So I had a lot of mentorship in PA school compared to undergrad, where I had people I could ask questions, bounce ideas off of. And I was fortunate enough to have those mentors guide me through PA school. And probably because it's such a small community here, onwards, I'd probably still, you know, ask for advice from those mentors and hopefully become a mentor myself for any PA students or pre-PAs.
That's something that mentorship is something that I've heard a lot with a lot of students who are in clinical kind of based programs like nurses and dental assistants and that kind of stuff. Is one of the most common things that people say is that mentorship is so important. Not even like one for the encouragement and the, you know, inspiration, but also too because of the networking value and just getting in there and talking to someone who has been in your shoes and who, you know, started from where you are and now works in that practical setting, or even if they're just an older student, someone who has had that experience already and can tell you and help you figure out if this like if you're making the right choice, because a lot of the time, especially with a practical field, it's a different experience to learn about it in the classroom than it is to actually go and be out there in that clinical setting and realize like, oh, this is what I'm getting myself into.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you said. Like, I think mentorships is more than just like, getting help. It's about like meeting people, and sometimes like your mentor knows someone they can connect you to, and then you meet them, and then they come with like, a unique set of skills, knowledge, and experience that you can learn from. And it's just like I guess like a positive reinforcement cycle. So when you get mentored, like you are tempted, like, you're inspired to mentor people, and then it just keeps going. And I think the PA community in Canada specifically, because it's such a small community, mentorship is definitely like a big factor in getting pre-PAs or getting PA students to successfully finish PA school and also be successful in their career.
Yeah, and just building that passion for people who feel that passion for that, because I feel like that, like what you were saying, how that the fact that it is a growing industry and people are kind of most students are kind of stepping into the whole advocacy role is really helpful to build that passion and to know like this is what I want to do, and it makes you feel really good about making that choice.
Exactly. And even in hindsight, like once you get into PA school, you see all these pre-PAs who would do anything to be in your shoes, to be that PA student. And you're like, meanwhile, you're like, wow, PA school is super stressful, but like there are all these people who would be in my shoes, and it kind of motivates you to like, make them proud, but make yourself proud, and like push through those like adversities that you face. So yeah, I think it's definitely like a positive thing and like a positive reinforcement cycle.
And a really rewarding outcome, I'm sure too, especially when you build that. Awesome. What is one of your favorite memories so far from, and either whether you want to talk about one from undergrad or PA school, it's up to you.
I would say, so I guess this is like not academic, but I really enjoyed my varsity tennis experience. I really like that, like how it supplemented my academic career or my academic time at Western. And actually what was super memorable is my last year, I got the opportunity to captain the team, and we actually won provincials that year. So it was like a great way to finish. So I think that's probably would be my top pick in that sense. Academically, I would say like that aha moment, that epiphany I had when I found the PA profession, because it definitely like motivated me to finish undergrad, but it still continues to motivate me to like, finish PA school and like find a job and do well as a PA. So I think when I found like the PA profession, I called my mom. I'm like, this can't be real. Like, this is too good to be true. So, and she's like, no, I haven't heard of a PA. What do you mean? But it's amazing in like the 4 years since that I've had that epiphany, like PAs are way more established now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that would be like my academic favorite memorable moment.
I mean, that is a pretty memorable moment because it helped to shape your career, right? So definitely unforgettable.
Yeah.
Another question that we always ask our student influencers is, if you could go back and talk to your 15-year-old self, what would you say, or what advice would you give?
I would say, I guess, like, don't settle, or like follow the path that everyone's, I guess, takes. I think I mentioned earlier that medical school was something that I've always like been told that I should pursue, or like it's the most popular option if you're someone interested in the sciences. But I would tell my 15-year-old self to kind of be patient and like not hesitate to explore my options. So I like even now, like back then definitely, but even now I have people around me saying like, oh, like you should definitely pursue medical school. And I think back then I was a bit more hesitant or a bit more vulnerable to those kind of opinions. But now I'm like, no, this is it. This is like what I want. So I guess just going back and giving that reassurance to my 15-year-old self to trust the process, and that eventually I will find what I would want to do and what aligns with my interests and goals.
That's definitely a pressure that you hear a lot of students facing, is like their parents want them to be a doctor or a lawyer or some kind of, big time career like that, and they're like, well, no, I want to do this. And it's a really hard conversation sometimes, especially depending on the approach that your parents have as well.
Yeah, no, and I think like culturally, like having immigrant parents, like they definitely wanted what's best for me.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I moved here when I was 4, like my parents definitely had to make a lot of sacrifices to come to Canada and prioritize our education. So when they hear their child saying, "Oh, I'm just going to do a degree in kinesiology," they're like, "What? Like, what do you mean you're not going to medical school?" But it's, I guess, like in like looking back now, my dad was actually the hardest to convince. So that's why I say my dad's been like telling our relatives and family friends, like, you should definitely consider kinesiology. It's a great profession. And then like physician assistant now. So I guess it's good to see that change, like my parents' like thought process. But it's definitely, I agree with you. Like having that conversation with your parents to not just convince them that it's like a good career option, but like let them know that you could be successful as a kin or as a PA. And I'm lucky enough in that both professions have actually boosted in the last few years and become more well established. But yeah, regardless, if you're passionate about something, like have that conversation and kind of follow your heart, as cheesy as that sounds.
No, it's true though.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason people say it very often.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's helpful for anybody. I don't think it matters what program you're studying or even what background you have.
Yeah, because I think like with passion comes like good work and like talent. So if you're passionate about something, it's probably because you're good at it or you're interested in it, and then that means you'll be good at that job. So like your performance is going to be great, you're going to do well in it, versus something that you're going into because someone else is telling you to go into it and you're like you're unsure, you're like half-heartedly choosing to go into this profession, and then you end up like not doing so well. So I think in the long run, if you look at it, if you're passionate about something, you're going to do better than no matter what career choice that is. You're going to probably perform well and do well overall.
Yeah, like no one wants to be treated by a doctor who never wanted to be there in the first place and like
exactly
didn't really want to get involved. Like that wouldn't make me feel very comfortable as a patient.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, you need to love your job in order to do well in your job and take care of your patients. So yeah, in that case, like I guess and that's the thing, like, do you want to practice medicine, you want to see patients, but then do you want to be the doctor, or do you want to be the PA, or do you want to be the NP? Do you want to be the nurse? There's so many options that people usually don't consider. They're like, okay, medicine, okay, med school, like immediately, right? So
okay, doctor.
Exactly. So I think just realizing that there's so many more career options down the line. Like I'm still discovering new careers as I go through, and like, as I go through the clinical setting, I'm like, I think SLP was like a new one I discovered in undergrad, where you don't learn about it much, but I had a friend who wanted to be an SLP, and actually like encountering an SLP in undergrad and then working alongside one during my clerkship year. I'm like, oh, so this is what SLPs do, and knowing what their expertise is so that you can use it in your practice as a future clinician. But yeah, so many unique opportunities out there, career options out there.
An SLP is like a speech language pathologist. Okay.
Sorry, yes.
Okay. No, that's what I thought. I don't even know how I knew that, but I was like, I should probably clarify that.
Yes.
Awesome. So what advice would you give to someone who might be just starting university this year? I know it's a tricky year to ask that, but
that too, the online learning and everything, right?
Yeah.
So, I guess I would say, like, don't stress yourself thinking about like the ultimate end goal or your dream job just yet. Like, it's okay to know that like things are going to be uncertain for for a while, because you're just, taking these courses. And I think especially transitioning from high school to undergrad, what we said earlier, it's super difficult in its like and on its own, that adding that extra stress about like, okay, what am I trying to accomplish with this paid education is not going to really help your performance. So I would say, like, I would encourage students to explore their options, take courses that interest them, and find things that you're like intrinsically motivated or intrinsically interested in, instead of things that, you're like, okay, like, yeah, I like sciences, maybe I'll just take biology, chemistry, or physics. So that's something. And then marks. I think a lot of students put stress on marks. They're like, oh, grades are important. This is like, this is what's going to determine whether I get into med school or whether I get into any program. But I think if you're like passionate about what you're learning, and if you like, again, pace yourself and learn efficiently, you start early, you're not cramming, then usually the results will come. And as you go through undergrad, you'll become more experienced as a student as well. and as a learner. So the marks will definitely come. And yeah, and I think like enjoy the university experience. Like now that I'm finished PA school, I'm like, man, I'm like, that's it. I'm done being a student unless I pursue like a master's or something. But it's still never going to be that undergrad experience where you get the opportunity to live on res and live off campus, but still like close to like university, but sometimes like even away from family, and that you're learning all these like real life skills where you can't be like, mom, do my laundry, or like things like that. So, and then when you come home, actually, when you're away from like, for university and you come home, you get treated super special. So
you come home on the weekend and everyone's so excited to see you, and like right? Everyone wants to hang out with you and like have you over for dinner, and
right?
Like,
yeah. So I really enjoyed that. Yeah. So I think university experience as a whole is like super memorable in its sense, like on itself. So don't stress about grades, don't stress about like the end goal. Everything will kind of fall into place.
Definitely. I think that's some pretty sound advice that most students would benefit from. So thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
Another thing we kind of like to ask as we get closer to the end of the interviews is if you have a favorite motivational quote that you would like to share.
I really like this one quote by Muhammad Ali.
Okay.
So I think it goes, I hated every minute of training, but I said, don't quit, suffer now, and live the rest of your life as a champion, or something like that. Like I had a poster of Muhammad Ali like above my desk when I studied in PA school, and I'm like, yes, exactly. Like I'm suffering now, so I live like, as a great PA later on. But yeah, like this quote speaks to like my, I guess, mentality in all aspects of life. So again, like whether it was studying in PA school or school in general, or even training on the tennis court as like a competitor, like I truly believe in like, if you put in the work and make the sacrifices in your present situation, then you get to enjoy all the successes in the long run. Yeah. That being said, the grind never ends. And I think it's just like the extent of the sacrifices you make. Like when you're younger, you have to make all these sacrifices, and then you get to like, live like a good life later on. So that's something that I think that quote speaks to.
I think that's true. Like the grind never stops, but it changes.
Yeah.
And the reward changes. And once you reach one thing, and it should always be like that, because like for most of the time, every stage of your life is you working hard toward a goal. Mm-hmm. And when there's no goal, no next goal, it's kind of like you kind of lose the meaning of why you're doing something, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think, yeah, and I think like when you make those sacrifices earlier on in your life, you get that ultimate reward of, landing a good career. And then after that, like everything, I guess, is relatively not as big an incentive, but sometimes people do have that, like, that big reward later on in their life, and that's cool as well. But I'm saying, I think you always have to make those sacrifices in your present situation, and that extent of that kind of varies as you go down.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be like these huge, massive goals every single time, but it could be like, okay, I got the job I really wanted. Now my goal is to, work really hard at that job and either, I don't know, get a promotion or move up here, or even just, it doesn't even have to be that big of a deal either.
Exactly. Yeah. Something small. Yeah. Like even like getting a pat on the back by your supervising physician, like because you did so well, or catching like a unique case and, diagnosing it properly. Yeah. It could be something super small like that, but it's rewarding nonetheless. But like, again, you're not sacrificing like so much.
No. Yeah. And you're not spending 10 hours a day studying for it anymore. And you're just kind of working toward it at a pace that's different or that works for you.
Exactly. Yeah,
definitely. So we like to end each interview with a more fun kind of question. And that is, what is your favorite social media platform and why?
So I guess it's Instagram now. As much as I was late to the party to join Instagram, it's been a great platform for me to share my journey through PA school, because I think it's like a good mix of like visually appealing, but also interactive, like through Insta stories. Mm-hmm. And I think like the audience also perceives this as like, the best platform, because I've tried like blogs and different things, and Instagram seems to be doing the best in terms of audience receiving the information. So on my Insta, I try to like share my major milestones, completing a rotation, or, like finishing PA school. That was a major milestone for me. And then I share some like updates on Insta stories, and I do this interactive like case-based learning where it's called Test Day Tuesday. And like everyone, like all my followers will be like, okay, yeah, like I'm just going to like learn as I just answer this question wrong or right, or like,
right.
Super. I think the mix of interactive and then, focusing on like the visual aspect of it is super great about Instagram. And yeah, I would say that's probably my favorite social media platform for that reason.
Definitely. Do you want to share your Instagram handle here so that our followers can follow you as well?
Sure. So for anyone listening, if you want to follow along, my Instagram handle is Aurthi.pa. So AURTHI.pa.
We'll post that in the description as well, and we'll tag you when we publish the interview so people can find you. Awesome. And go and see your content. So before we wrap up, do you have any final insights that you want to, I know we've shared a lot of really great insights, but do you have anything else, any final things you want to say before we wrap up?
Yeah, I guess just trust the process and things will fall in place. Like I think certain times it'll be uncertain, but certain times it will be uncertain. Yeah, things will eventually fall into place. And I guess this statement applies like no matter what stage of education you're in. I do want to wish all the listeners good luck if you're students, and enjoy the journey.
Definitely. That's a great point to leave off on. All of the insights you've shared today have been super, super helpful. And I think that any listeners, especially those who are going into PA school, but I think all of our listeners in general will get a lot of great value from that. So I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to talk to me and to share all of that with me today.
Thank you for the interview.
Thank you so much.